There are days when you wake up, and the very act of getting out of bed feels like climbing a mountain. You drink your coffee, drag yourself through the routine, and yet no amount of rest seems to heal the exhaustion that sits inside you. And so you ask yourself, why am I always tired? But the truth is, it may not be tiredness at all. It may be something deeper, heavier, and far more suffocating. It is the weight of a life that does not belong to you. The fatigue that gnaws at your spirit does not always come from sleepless nights. It often comes from living a life that was written by someone else's hand. Let us explore this truth together. The body has a way of speaking when the soul is not heard. We think of tiredness as a matter of the flesh, a shortage of hours of sleep, or the result of too much physical labor. Yet so often this is not the true source of our weariness. The deepest exhaustion comes when the soul has been abandoned, when the life being lived bears no resemblance to the life one longs for. In such cases, the body becomes the mouthpiece of the spirit, whispering its protest through fatigue, through a heaviness that no rest can heal. There are countless people who feel this every day. They wake, they go about their duties, they fulfill the expectations laid before them, and yet inside there is a strange dullness, a lethargy that lingers even after long hours of sleep. Doctors may prescribe vitamins, psychologists may recommend better routines, yet nothing changes because the ailment is not of the body alone. It is the soul crying out, suffocated by the walls of a life that denies its true direction. Science itself affirms what ancient wisdom has long known, that when a person's labor stands in opposition to their inner calling, the body suffers. Studies on burnout reveal that misalignment between passion and profession creates exhaustion more severe than long hours or difficult tasks. A person working 80 hours on something they love may still feel energy surging through them, while another working half the time in a life misaligned may feel perpetually drained. The difference is not in stamina, but in meaning. Imagine the painter who feels compelled to capture light and color, yet spends their years drowning in endless spreadsheets. The hands that long for brushes and canvas instead type figures and balance sheets, while the spirit inside withers. Or the builder whose imagination reaches toward structures and creations, but who instead sits imprisoned in sterile meetings where nothing new is ever born. Such individuals may live respectably, even successfully in the eyes of society, yet they pay with their vitality. The body performs, yes, but it performs with resistance, because the soul does not consent. I once spoke with a young man who confessed that he felt tired every single day, no matter how much he slept. His eyes carried a heaviness, his voice a muted weight, and yet there was nothing outwardly wrong with him. He was in good health, he exercised, he slept, and yet he woke each day more tired than the one before. But then he told me something remarkable. One weekend he had gone hiking, something he had loved since childhood, but rarely allowed himself to do, out in the wilderness, surrounded by trees and silence. His energy returned. He walked for hours without complaint, and when he returned home, he felt renewed in a way no amount of sleep had ever given him. It was not his body that had been exhausted, it was his soul deprived of what nourished it. That brief return to his true element had revived him more than rest ever could. This is the first truth we must understand. We are not machines made merely of flesh and bone. We are meaning-seeking beings. We thrive not only on food and sleep, but on purpose, on expression, on the fulfillment of our inner longings. Without this nourishment, life itself grows heavy. One may rest 100 times and still wake weary, for it is not sleep the soul is asking for, but recognition. Consider for a moment the strange paradox of human energy. When people engage in something that truly resonates with them, they often find themselves forgetting time entirely. A writer may spend 10 hours lost in words and emerge feeling alive rather than drained. A teacher who loves to awaken minds may leave the classroom filled with energy even after a long day. A musician absorbed in sound may practice until dawn without complaint. In these cases, the body is not punished by the work but sustained by it, for the soul is in agreement. Exhaustion, in such moments, transforms into fulfillment. But when the opposite occurs, when there is dissonance between the soul's desire and the life being lived, even the smallest tasks feel monumental. The hours crawl, the body aches, the mind dulls, and nothing seems to restore vitality. This is why so many people report feeling perpetually tired without clear cause. They treat the symptom but ignore the origin. They feed the body but starve the soul. It is no accident that the language of depression often echoes the language of fatigue. People describe feeling weighed down, unable to move, heavy with an invisible burden. What burdens them is often the unlived life pressing against the cage of conformity. The spirit knows when it has been denied, and it uses the body as its battleground. Illness, anxiety, restlessness, and chronic exhaustion are often its way of saying, "You have abandoned yourself too long." I believe the body grows weary not because it is weak, but because it is honest. It cannot lie to you as easily as the mind can. The mind will rationalize, "This is a good job, this is stability, this is what my family expects of me." But the body tells the truth through its fatigue. This is not where you belong. That heaviness you feel each morning, that inexplicable exhaustion that lingers despite all your efforts, is often the truest compass you possess. And so the question is not only how to rest the body, but how to listen to the soul. What activities bring you alive? What passions did you silence in the name of practicality? What longings have you buried under obligation? To ignore these questions is to condemn yourself to perpetual weariness, but to ask them courageously and to begin reshaping your life around their answers is to rediscover energy you thought you had lost forever. The tragedy is that many people mistake this spiritual fatigue for weakness. They think themselves lazy or incapable, when in truth they are merely carrying the unbearable weight of a life misaligned. They blame themselves for what is, in reality, a profound and universal experience, the suffering of the soul when it is ignored. The young man who felt renewed by his hike found that his energy was not gone. It was only locked behind the door of neglect. By returning, even briefly, to what he loved, he glimpsed the truth. He was not broken, only misplaced. This is true for countless others. The exhaustion you feel may not be the sign of a failing body, but the cry of an abandoned spirit. And so the path forward is not simply more sleep, better diet, or stricter schedules, though these things matter. The deeper path is to align your outer life with your inner truth, to give voice to the desires you have silenced, to allow the body and soul to move in harmony rather than opposition. For when the soul consents, the body no longer resists. Energy flows, joy awakens, and life, once heavy, becomes light. From the earliest days of life, we are shaped not only by our desires, but also by the expectations that others impose upon us. Parents, teachers, relatives, and the larger circle of society weave a net around us, sometimes gently, sometimes forcefully, telling us who we should be, how we should act, and what paths we must follow. It begins with small words, with subtle comparisons, with the unspoken rules that define what is considered acceptable and what is not. A child learns early that certain dreams are smiled upon while others are dismissed as impractical. A young mind, still tender and seeking belonging, adapts quickly, bending its spirit to fit the mold laid before it. And though outwardly this conformity may seem harmless, the inner cost accumulates like a hidden debt, draining vitality over time until the spirit itself begins to stumble under its weight. We live in a world where invisible scripts dictate the rhythm of life. You must study hard, you must choose a respectable career, you must marry by a certain age, you must raise children, you must climb the ladder, you must secure stability. These words, must, should, have to become shackles that silently govern countless lives. And though a person may dutifully fulfill them, the cost is often borne by the soul. Every day spent in obedience to someone else's script is a day where the authentic self is exiled to the shadows, forced into silence. The body may survive, but the spirit withers, and the withering reveals itself in fatigue, in discontent, in that strange sense of emptiness that no achievement seems to fill. Consider the woman who dreamed of travel, of walking foreign streets, of tasting life in its many colors. Her spirit longed for freedom, for adventure, for discovery, yet the voices around her spoke of respectability, of tradition, of staying close to home. They praised stability over exploration, familiarity over risk. And so she remained. She did what was asked of her, and in return she received admiration, social approval, even a sense of safety. Outwardly her life was intact, but inwardly she carried a quiet grief, the grief of a self never lived. Her constant tiredness was not a result of overwork or physical strain. It was the exhaustion of pretending, of suffocating her own truth beneath layers of obligation. Her spirit was clothed in masks, and the effort of wearing them drained her life force. This is the hidden tragedy of expectations. They do not merely guide, they confine. They create an invisible prison where individuals spend their energy not on becoming who they truly are, but on maintaining the facade of who they are supposed to be. The more you comply, the more you betray yourself, and the deeper the betrayal, the heavier the burden becomes. It is no wonder so many feel crushed beneath a weight they cannot name, a tiredness that sleep cannot repair. It is the weight of unchosen lives, of unlived dreams, of identities forced upon us rather than born from within. Psychologists and researchers often speak of the toll that lack of autonomy takes on human beings. People who feel they have little control over their choices consistently report higher levels of stress, anxiety, and fatigue. The soul longs for freedom, for agency, for the dignity of shaping its own path. When this is denied, even small daily actions feel oppressive. The energy required to suppress one's own longings in order to please others is far greater than the energy required to pursue authentic passions. Pretending consumes more strength than living truthfully. Think of the man who becomes a lawyer because his family believes it to be the highest mark of success, though his heart quietly longs for music. He wears the suit, he enters the courtroom, he earns the accolades. Outwardly, he is a figure of achievement, but inwardly he feels hollow. Each case one feels less like a triumph, and more like a confirmation that he is trapped in a story he did not write. He comes home exhausted, not because the work itself is too great, but because every day is an act of disconnection between who he is and what he does. His spirit knows it is in exile, and his body bears the fatigue of that exile. This conflict between expectation and authenticity is not a small matter. It is the root of much suffering. Many people believe they are tired because life is demanding, but in truth they are tired because life is demanding and meaningless. They carry the double burden of effort and emptiness. To work hard at something you love fills you with vitality, but to work hard at something that betrays your essence, drains you twice, once in labor and again in grief. The saddest part is that much of this imprisonment happens quietly, without protest. The chains of expectation are subtle. They are woven with love, with culture, with duty, and so we rarely notice them until the heaviness becomes unbearable. A young person chooses a path out of respect for family. Years later, they realize they no longer know who they truly are. Their fatigue has grown chronic, their joy dimmed, and yet they feel powerless to escape, for the cage has become invisible, made of the very values they were taught to honor. And so the spirit suffocates, the masks multiply. One mask for family, another for colleagues, another for society. The true self hides deeper and deeper, waiting for a moment of honesty, a crack in the facade, a chance to breathe. But the longer it waits, the heavier the burden becomes. The constant effort of maintaining identities that are not our own consumes more energy than living authentically ever could. It is here that many people mistake the signs. They believe they are simply tired, overworked, perhaps in need of a vacation. They search for remedies in sleep, in entertainment, in distraction, yet nothing heals because the wound lies deeper. A vacation may rest the body, but it cannot free the soul from a life that does not belong to it. What is needed is not rest, but courage. The courage to question the expectations that bind us, to ask whose voice we are truly obeying, and to risk disappointing others in order to remain faithful to ourselves. For the spirit cannot thrive under the weight of borrowed dreams. It demands authenticity, even at great cost. And until that authenticity is honored, tiredness will remain, a constant shadow, reminding us that we are not where we are meant to be. It is not laziness, it is not weakness. It is the silent protest of the soul, the grief of the unlived life, the fatigue of masks that no longer fit. And so, the question becomes not, how do I escape tiredness, but whose life am I living? Until one dares to answer, the weight of expectations will continue to cripple the spirit, and the body will continue to bear the silent cost. Pretending is one of the most exhausting labors a human being can endure. To walk through life wearing a mask, concealing what one truly feels, desires, or believes, is to drain the soul of its natural vitality. Outwardly, such a person may seem composed, successful, even admired, but inwardly they fight an endless war against themselves. The truth longs to rise, to be spoken, to be lived, but instead it is buried under the heavy soil of fear, conformity, and expectation, and this burial requires constant effort. It is not simply silence, it is suppression. Every moment of suppression consumes energy. Every lie to oneself depletes the spirit. We know this intuitively. Imagine the strain of keeping a secret, even a small one. The mind circles around it, guarding it, protecting it, rehearsing what to say and what not to say. Now extend this to an entire life lived as a secret, where the real self is hidden from the world day after day. The fatigue becomes overwhelming. The person may not even understand why they are so tired, why they collapse into bed without ever having done anything that feels alive. It is because they are not only living, they are hiding. Hiding is laborious. Hiding is the silent thief of vitality. Just as a computer slows down when too many programs run unseen in the background, so too does the mind falter when it must constantly maintain disguises. Every interaction becomes a calculation. What will they think if I say this? Will they still approve of me if I reveal that? Should I pretend to agree, even though inside I do not? These unspoken questions may never reach the lips, but they drain energy with relentless precision. The performance of the false self requires vigilance, and vigilance consumes strength. It is no wonder, then, that burnout follows swiftly in lives where truth is denied. Studies on workplace satisfaction confirm what the soul has always known, that authenticity is not a luxury, but the foundation of well-being. When people feel safe to be themselves, their energy increases, their creativity flourishes, and their productivity soars. It is not merely that they are happier, it is that the burden of pretense has been lifted. They no longer spend their strength concealing what is real. Conversely, when individuals must hide, when they must wear the mask of compliance or suppress their individuality, their energy wanes. Even tasks they are capable of become unbearable. The body drags itself through the day, and the mind grows dull, because the very act of living in disguise depletes the life force. There is a profound irony here. Many people believe that being authentic is risky, dangerous, even selfish. They fear rejection, judgment, or failure, so they choose the safer path, silence, conformity, compliance. Yet in protecting themselves from imagined danger, they create a reality that is far more destructive. They exchange temporary acceptance for permanent exhaustion. They secure approval but lose vitality. They keep relationships intact but sacrifice the relationship with themselves. I once listened to a woman describe her life in terms of constant fatigue. She was admired by her peers, respected by her family, and seen as an example of success. Yet she confessed that she felt empty inside, and no amount of rest restored her. She finally admitted that she had spent years pretending to be someone she was not. She laughed at jokes she did not find funny. She worked in a career that meant nothing to her. She lived in a marriage that was more performance than love. Every day was an act, and she was the actor, applauded by everyone except her own soul. Her exhaustion was not the result of too much to do, it was the result of too much to hide. Authenticity, then, is not a matter of indulgence. It is not something one chooses only if convenient, it is fuel. It is the source from which energy flows. To live truthfully is to align inner life with outer expression, to remove the drain of suppression. When the self is permitted to exist without disguise, strength returns. Even in difficulty, even in hard work, there is a kind of lightness, because one is no longer expending energy on resistance. Work that is honest, even when strenuous, does not deplete in the same way as work that is false. Truth sustains, falsehood consumes. Think of the craftsman who pours himself into building something meaningful. Though the labor is long and the body aches, he feels renewed because his work reflects his inner being. Now think of the office worker who forces himself into tasks that deny his essence. Though the tasks are small, the exhaustion is immense. The difference lies not in the weight of the work, but in the alignment of the soul. When truth flows through action, the burden lightens. When resistance dominates, even small acts become unbearable. There is also the deeper psychological toll of living falsely. When one resists authenticity, they are at war with themselves. One part of the psyche strives to emerge, while another part suppresses it. The inner conflict splits energy, dividing strength that might otherwise be used for growth, creativity, and love. Over time, this inner war creates symptoms: anxiety, depression, fatigue, even illness. The body rebels against the lie, signaling that something essential has been denied. The pain is not punishment, but a call. It is the soul's attempt to reclaim the life that was abandoned in favor of appearances. This is why no amount of rest can heal the tiredness of the false self. Sleep may restore the body, but it cannot restore a soul that has been silenced. People go on vacations, they take breaks, they seek distractions, but the fatigue follows them wherever they go. For the fatigue is not from work, but from pretense. Only authenticity can heal it. Only the courage to live as one truly is can release the energy trapped in suppression, and so we must come to see authenticity not as a risk, but as necessity. To live truthfully is to conserve life's most precious energy. To resist authenticity is to waste it in endless disguise. One may think that conformity will protect them, but it is a costly protection, purchased at the price of the soul. The irony is that the very freedom, joy, and strength we seek are locked behind the door we are most afraid to open, the door of our own truth. There is no greater liberation than to remove the mask, to speak with the voice that has long been silenced, to live in alignment with what the heart knows. Yes, it may bring discomfort. Yes, it may cost relationships, approval, or security. But it restores something far greater: vitality, integrity, wholeness. The energy once spent on hiding can finally be spent on living, and life, when lived in truth, ceases to feel like a burden. It becomes, even in hardship, a gift. When a person strays too far from the truth of their inner being, life does not allow the betrayal to go unchallenged. One may silence the voice of the soul for a time, drown it out with work, distraction, or duty, but eventually it finds a way to be heard. The rebellion of the soul is often misunderstood as illness or weakness, but in truth it is an act of necessity. Depression, anxiety, chronic fatigue, these are not always enemies to be eradicated, but messengers bearing a painful truth. You have wandered too far from yourself. They are signals, urgent and insistent, that the path you are walking no longer belongs to you. For years, many carry on in lives that do not nourish them, convincing themselves that stability is enough, that the applause of others should suffice, that personal sacrifice is the price of respectability. And yet, beneath this surface compliance, the inner self watches silently, waiting for the moment to rise. It waits until the betrayal becomes unbearable, and then it begins to speak in the only language it can, through suffering. The sleepless nights, the endless fatigue, the heaviness in the chest, these are not random afflictions, but the body and spirit conspiring together to draw attention to what has been ignored. I recall the story of a man who spent decades in a career that gave him stability but no joy. To the world, he was a model of success, dependable, responsible, always in control. But the truth is that he had abandoned the dreams of his youth, the quiet passion for writing that once gave him life. He told himself there was no time, that such pursuits were frivolous, that real men focused on work and security. For years he silenced the longing within him, and then one day, without warning, he collapsed. His body simply refused to continue. What appeared as a breakdown, an act of failure, was in truth the uprising of the soul demanding to be heard. It was painful, humiliating even, but it was also merciful. For in that collapse, he finally confronted the truth of his betrayal. Stripped of pretense, forced into stillness, he began to write again. At first awkwardly, uncertainly, but then with growing passion. The energy he thought was gone forever returned, not because he had rested, but because he had reconciled with himself. This is the paradox of the soul's punishment. It feels like destruction, but it is often the beginning of healing. What we call depression can be the psyche's way of withdrawing energy from a false life, refusing to support the continuation of a path that denies authenticity. What we call anxiety can be the alarm bell of a self trapped in a cage, straining for release. What we call fatigue may be the exhaustion of carrying masks too heavy to bear. These experiences, though agonizing, can be the very forces that save us, because they leave us no choice but to turn inward and listen. It is tempting, of course, to treat these signals as mere dysfunctions. We reach for pills, distractions, quick solutions to silence the pain. Yet when we do so without addressing the underlying betrayal, we merely delay the confrontation. The soul is patient, but it is relentless. It will not let you escape the truth of who you are. If you ignore the whispers, they become cries. If you ignore the cries, they become collapse. Life, in this way, has a strange mercy. It refuses to let us succeed in self-betrayal. There is profound wisdom in the way the psyche resists. It refuses to allow you to thrive while abandoning yourself. Imagine the cruelty of a life where one could betray their essence and still feel joy. It would mean the death of the soul itself. Instead, the soul ensures that betrayal carries a cost, that misalignment creates pain, that neglecting one's inner truth breeds suffering. What seems like punishment is, in fact, protection. It is life insisting that you must return to yourself, that no amount of external success will compensate for internal abandonment. Many people fear these inner punishments, believing them to be signs of weakness. They feel ashamed of their depression, embarrassed by their anxiety, guilty for their fatigue. But what if these are not failures? What if they are signals of integrity? To suffer when you betray yourself is a sign of health, not sickness. It means your soul is still alive enough to protest. The greater tragedy would be to feel nothing, to go on indefinitely in a life of lies without the soul ever raising its voice. And so, when the symptoms come, they should not always be silenced, but listened to. They should not only be treated, but interpreted, for they are trying to tell you something urgent. You have lost your way. The life you are living is not yours. The person you present to the world is not the person you truly are. The man who collapsed into his breakdown discovered this truth painfully, but he also discovered something liberating. He realized that the punishment of the soul was not his enemy. It was his chance to be reborn. What he thought was the end of his strength was the beginning of his authenticity. Every word he wrote became a thread connecting him back to himself, and with each page he felt life returning. He came to see that the collapse had been an act of mercy, for without it he might have continued in silent despair until death. We are often taught to fear suffering, to see it only as something to escape. But suffering, especially the suffering of the soul, has its own intelligence. It forces us to pause, to confront what we have avoided, to strip away illusions. It brings us to the edge of ourselves and demands honesty. And though the process is brutal, it is also transformative. Those who have gone through it and emerged on the other side often speak not of destruction, but of awakening. They say, "I finally came home to myself." This is why the soul's punishment should not be regarded as cruelty. It is the strict teacher who refuses to let you wander too far from truth. It is the inner guardian who demands fidelity to your essence. Yes, it can feel unbearable. Yes, it can break you, but in the breaking it can also set you free. In the end, the only real betrayal in life is the betrayal of oneself. All other failures pale in comparison. And the soul, knowing this, will not allow such betrayal to go unchallenged. It will rise up through suffering if necessary to call you back. What feels like punishment is the path to liberation, if only you dare to listen. The exhaustion that haunts so many people today is not cured by sleep, by coffee, or by temporary escapes into entertainment and vacations. These things may soothe the body for a while, but they do not heal the deeper wound. What we call tiredness is often not physical at all. It is the heaviness of living a life that does not belong to us. It is the fatigue of carrying someone else's expectations, of walking in shoes that do not fit, of spending day after day in a story that is not truly our own. No amount of rest can renew a spirit that feels caged. The only real antidote is the courage to choose your own life, to ask yourself honestly, whose story am I living, and when will I begin to live my own? This question is not a luxury for the dreamers or the privileged. It is the fundamental responsibility of every human soul. To avoid it is to live in quiet despair, always hoping that tomorrow will feel lighter, even while tomorrow repeats the same weight as today. Liberation does not always mean throwing everything away and starting from nothing. Sometimes it begins with the smallest acts of rebellion against inauthenticity. It might be as simple as writing for an hour before the demands of the world intrude, or refusing one obligation that drains your spirit, or choosing to nurture a passion on the side even when others do not understand. These small gestures, seemingly insignificant, are in truth declarations to the soul: I am listening, I am willing, I am beginning. Every small act of choice is a thread that pulls you closer to yourself. It builds momentum in ways you cannot predict. A single refusal of what no longer serves, you may open the space for what does. A single hour given to your true passion may awaken energy you thought had long been extinguished. And each time you dare to claim such a choice, you weaken the chains of the false life that bind you. In this way, liberation rarely arrives in a thunderclap of sudden revolution. It arrives in daily steps of fidelity to your inner truth. Modern research on happiness confirms this ancient wisdom. Those who feel they have agency, the freedom to choose, consistently report greater well-being, lower fatigue, and higher satisfaction in life. But we do not need statistics to tell us what the soul already knows. When we feel trapped, we wither, and when we feel free, we flourish. Even the smallest taste of choice revives the spirit, like water to a parched plant. For choice is not merely an external freedom. It is the inner recognition that my life belongs to me, that I am not merely an actor in someone else's script, but the author of my own. To live inauthentically is to live divided. One part of you complies, smiles, and performs, while another part cries out in silence, longing for expression. This division consumes energy endlessly, because the psyche is forced to maintain two realities at once. But when you step into your own life, even with trembling hands, even with uncertain steps, the division begins to heal, the inner and the outer align. You no longer waste energy pretending, concealing, or carrying obligations that suffocate you. Suddenly, what once felt like exhaustion transforms into energy, even joy. This is not because life becomes easier, but because it becomes yours. Consider how heavy it feels to push a cart uphill when it is filled with someone else's burdens. Every step strains the muscles, every moment tempts you to give up. But when the cart is filled with your own chosen treasures, even if it is just as heavy, something changes. You push not with resentment, but with devotion. You sweat, but you are alive. You struggle, but you know why. This is the secret of energy in life. It does not come from the absence of difficulty, but from the presence of meaning. And so the question becomes unavoidable. What life are you carrying today? Is it the life your parents envisioned for you, the life society rewards, the life that looks respectable on the outside, but feels hollow on the inside? Or is it the life that calls you in the quiet hours of the night, the one that stirs your imagination, the one that feels both terrifying and true? So many people silence that second voice, dismissing it as impractical or childish. But it is precisely that voice which carries the seed of liberation. Choosing your own life will always feel frightening. It asks you to disappoint others, to walk away from applause, to risk failure in exchange for truth. But what is the alternative? To betray yourself in exchange for approval, to spend decades serving a dream that never belonged to you. To wake one day at the end of life and realize you were never truly alive. That is the heavier price, the one too unbearable to pay. The courage to choose does not demand perfection. It does not require that you burn all bridges and start over tomorrow. What it asks for is honesty, a willingness to admit that something inside you longs for more, and a commitment to give that longing space to breathe. You may begin with the smallest of steps, but if those steps are your own, they will awaken strength you did not know you had. Life has a way of rewarding authenticity with energy. When you begin to live truthfully, even hard work gives back more than it takes. Even setbacks feel purposeful. Even sacrifices feel lighter. But when you live falsely, no amount of rest restores you. You can sleep for 10 hours and still wake up tired, for your spirit is weary of the mask it wears. This is why the path of liberation always begins with choice. Without choice, there is only survival. With choice, there is life. In the end, liberation does not come from the world granting you permission. It comes from within, from the moment you dare to say, "This is my life, and I will live it as my soul demands." And when that moment arrives, the weight lifts. You may still have to climb mountains, but they are your mountains. You may still have to fight battles, but they are your battles. And in the struggle you will find a joy that cannot be faked, for you will finally be carrying the burden of your own dream. So when you feel tired, ask yourself, am I truly exhausted, or am I carrying the weight of a life I did not choose? The body needs rest, yes, but the soul demands authenticity. If you do not listen, it will drain you until you do. There is no greater tragedy than to die having never lived your own life. And there is no greater freedom than to awaken one morning and realize the tiredness is gone, not because you rested more, but because you finally stepped into the life that was waiting for you all along.